Dr. Marcus Webb had been working as cultural advisor to Velthari diplomat Lady Surlith for approximately 6 months. His role providing human perspective on complex alliance negotiations, her role representing Velthari interests in intricate multi-species trade agreements. Their working relationship had been consistently professional, cordial, but distinctly distant in emotional terms. Surlith maintained careful formality that Marcus had learned not to attempt breaking through, though he'd noticed subtle signs of profound loneliness beneath her polished diplomatic composure. Tonight they had just concluded a particularly grueling negotiation session. 18 hours straight, multiple factions with competing interests, tempers flaring repeatedly, compromise finally reached, but at significant emotional cost to everyone involved. Marcus was utterly exhausted, ready to return to his quarters and collapse into sleep. As he moved toward the door of Surlith's private office, where they'd been reviewing final documentation, he heard the distinct click of the door lock engaging. Surlith was standing by the door control panel. Her long, elegant ears, positioned in the Velthari expression Marcus had learned indicated intense internal conflict or distress. "Tonight we stay together," she said, her voice strained but resolute. "I need someone present with me, not professionally, not as advisor or colleague, just present in the same space." Marcus felt immediate concern. "Is something wrong? Are you in some kind of danger?" "No danger. Not physical danger from external threats. But I cannot be alone tonight. I've spent every single night for the past 3 years alone in these quarters after negotiations conclude. Tonight I cannot do that again. I am asking you, not ordering you, genuinely asking to stay. Just to be present in the same space as me, nothing more than simple presence." Marcus processed the situation carefully, considering the various implications and what Surlith was actually communicating. The door was locked, which on the surface seemed concerning. But Surlith had explicitly said she was asking, not ordering. Her body language showed profound vulnerability, not threat or coercion. This wasn't about control, it was about desperation reaching a breaking point. "Why tonight specifically?" he asked, deliberately settling into one of the office chairs rather than approaching the locked door or demanding she open it. Acknowledging her request by choosing to stay voluntarily rather than testing whether he could leave. 3 years ago tonight, my bonded partner died. Suddenly, without any warning, in a shuttle accident while returning from negotiations similar to today's exhausting session. We had been bonded for 15 years. He was my partner in every meaningful sense: personal, professional, emotional support. Her ears drooped dramatically in the distinctive Velthari expression of profound, unprocessed grief. "For 3 years, I've maintained absolutely perfect professional composure. I continued our shared diplomatic work because it mattered deeply to him and continues to matter to our people. But every night, and particularly this specific night each year, I return to these empty quarters and face the crushing loneliness that never stops hurting, never becomes easier to bear." She paused, her voice breaking slightly. "Tonight I realized I couldn't do that again. Couldn't face another anniversary night alone with grief I've never properly processed because I didn't know how to be vulnerable or ask for help." "You could have just asked me to stay without locking the door first," Marcus said gently, without judgment. "I locked the door because I was genuinely afraid that if I simply asked, you would make polite professional excuse and leave, or you would stay out of professional obligation while actually wanting to be elsewhere. The lock was my way of being brutally honest, of saying, I genuinely need someone present, and I'm too afraid to trust you'll stay if I give you an easy exit." She moved away from the door, sat in the chair facing him across the small office space. "But you're absolutely right. I should have just asked directly without the lock. I made this seem like coercion when I'm actually desperately asking for help from someone I've come to trust professionally, even though I've been too afraid to show any vulnerability. What kind of help do you need from me tonight? What are you actually asking for?" "I need someone to witness that I'm not fine. That behind the perfect diplomatic composure I maintain constantly is a person who's been grieving alone for 3 years because I didn't know how to ask for support or show vulnerability in professional contexts. I need someone to know and acknowledge that tonight is genuinely hard, that the anniversary of his death makes me feel like I'm drowning in memories and loss, and that I'm exhausted from pretending I'm emotionally unaffected. Marcus understood now with sudden clarity. She didn't want advice or active comfort or even necessarily conversation and solutions. She wanted someone to simply see her grief, to acknowledge it was real and valid, to let her be honest about struggling instead of maintaining her perfect diplomatic mask that denied any emotional impact. I can do that. I can be present. Bear witness that tonight is hard for you and that your grief is real. You don't have to perform composure or strength for me. Surelith visibly relaxed, the tension draining from her posture. Thank you. And I'm unlocking the door immediately now. She did exactly that, the lock clicking audibly open. You're completely free to leave if you want to, but I am asking you to stay. I'll stay. They spent the next several hours in her quarters, not in awkward, strained silence, but in gradually deepening, increasingly honest conversation. Surelith talked about her partner, their 15 years of bonding together, his sudden death 3 years ago, and how it had completely shattered her entire world. The overwhelming grief she deliberately buried under professional obligations and diplomatic responsibilities. The profound loneliness of continuing work they'd shared and cared about together while facing empty quarters every single night. Marcus shared his own experiences with significant loss, not a romantic partner, but his younger sister who had died in her 20s, how grief never really leaves or disappears, but you gradually learn to carry it differently over time. How sometimes the hardest part isn't the grief itself, but rather the social expectation that you should have moved on, according to some arbitrary timeline others set without understanding. 3 years and people expect me to be completely past it, Surelith said quietly. To have moved on, to have found a new partner perhaps, but I can't even imagine opening myself to that degree of emotional vulnerability again when I'm still actively carrying unprocessed grief from losing him. There's no standard timeline for grief. No, should have moved on by now, that's actually universal or valid. You process it at whatever pace you genuinely process it. And if that means you need someone present on the anniversary because being alone feels impossible, that's a completely legitimate need, not any kind of weakness. They eventually fell asleep. Surelith on her bed, Marcus in a chair he'd repositioned to a more comfortable location. Not romantic in nature, not even particularly intimate physically, just 2 people sharing space, so one of them didn't have to face a difficult anniversary night completely alone. When Marcus woke in the morning, Surelith was already awake, looking noticeably more rested and at peace than he'd seen her appear in months of working together. Thank you, she said with simple sincerity, for staying last night, for listening without judgment, for not criticizing me for needing help, or for initially locking the door out of fear you would leave if I just asked directly. You unlocked it immediately as soon as I said I would stay. And you were completely honest about why you'd locked it initially. That honesty and immediate correction matters significantly. I've been so intensely focused on maintaining perfect professional composure that I forgot I could ask for help when I needed it. Forgot that showing vulnerability isn't the same as weakness or professional failure. Last night, you gave me explicit permission to be honest about struggling emotionally, and that was substantially more valuable than any other support you could have offered. Over the following weeks, their working relationship evolved noticeably. Not into anything romantic, neither was emotionally ready for that, and it wouldn't be appropriate given their professional dynamic and power differential. But there was genuine honesty, now that hadn't existed before. Surelith occasionally admitted when negotiations were particularly emotionally difficult rather than maintaining perfect composure. Marcus shared when he was struggling with complex aspects of the cultural advisory work. They'd moved beyond purely professional facades to acknowledging they were both complete people dealing with difficult emotions while performing complex, demanding work. Months later, Surelith mentioned that night during a casual conversation about trust and vulnerability in professional contexts. I locked that door initially out of fear and desperation, afraid you would leave if I just asked, desperate for someone to witness my grief on the worst night of my year. But what I actually learned was that I could ask for help without locks or desperate measures. That showing genuine vulnerability didn't destroy me or my professional credibility. That sometimes the bravest thing is simply admitting you need someone present. and the kindest thing someone can do is be willing to simply be present without needing to fix or solve anything. And Marcus's perspective when asked about that night. She locked the door and said, "Tonight we stay together." On the surface, that could have been coercive or threatening, but she immediately explained her reasoning, apologized for the lock, and opened the door as soon as I agreed to stay voluntarily. What could have been about control or coercion was actually about someone reaching out for help in the only way they knew how, when they'd been alone with overwhelming grief for far too long. He paused thoughtfully. Sometimes people need simple presence more than advice or solutions. They need witnessing more than fixing. She needed someone to see her grief, acknowledge it was real and valid, and let her be honest about struggling on the worst night of her year. That's what I could offer. Not solutions or comfort that would make the grief disappear, but simple presence that said, "Your pain is real and you don't have to face it alone tonight." The door clicked shut. "Tonight we stay together," the alien woman said, became their private story about vulnerability, trust, and the courage required to ask for help when grief feels overwhelming. Not a story about control or coercion, but about someone finally admitting they needed support and someone else choosing to provide that support through simple, compassionate presence. Surelith had locked the door out of fear and desperation, but immediately corrected that choice when Marcus agreed to stay. And through that night of shared space,